Hello, good morning everyone. Welcome to BitKnits. Today I'm going to show you how to do the mitered granny square. I'm going to show you how to do this in two different ways, version 1 and version 2. Can you tell the difference? Version 1, we're working one round using that center granny round and then creating the mitered effect from then on, just working two sides. Version 2, we're working two rounds completely in the round and then creating the mitered effect working on two sides after those first two rounds. Very similar. You can see there's a little bit of differences in each square, but they make for a very unique granny square in the end, and you can definitely play around with color in this pattern. For my squares, I am using a 5mm crochet hook, and I have just picked some random scrap yarn from my stash for this tutorial. You can use any size yarn, any size hook, whatever you want. Granny squares are one of the best beginner projects because you really create something unique. You can really flow with it and it works up really quickly. So grab whatever hook you want to use, whatever yarn you have available, and we will crochet two versions of the mitered granny square. For our first square, I have picked 3 different colors. You can pick whatever colors that you want. You can use any size yarn, any size hook. For this square, I am just going to be using a 5mm crochet hook, and let's get started. I'm going to start with the green. And we're basically just working a granny square. So for this square, I am working that first round where we go all the way around and we create our 4 shells for round 1. So start with a magic ring. You can also do a chain 4 and slip stitch back into that first chain to create a ring. I'm going to chain 3. This is our first double crochet of the round. We're going to work 2 more double crochets into that ring. And now we have 3 double crochets. This is our first shell. As with any granny square, you can chain as many as you typically do in between your shells. So for the corners, I am going to chain 2, but if you usually chain 3, then go ahead and chain 3. And that is our corner. Now we're going to work 3 double crochets into the ring. That is my second shell, or my second side. We're at a corner. Chain 2. We're going to work 3 more double crochets. So this first round, each of these sets of shells represent one side. So there's my side 1, side 2, side 3. I'm going to pull that out just a little bit. We're at another corner, and this is going to be the top here. So I'm going to chain 2, work 3 more double crochets right into that ring. At the end, we need to create that corner. So we're going to chain 2 to kind of get around that corner, find the top of your chain 3, and just slip stitch right into it. You can pull your center closed, and now you've got round 1 of your granny square. I'm going to change colors, and since this is the version of the square where we're only working 1 round for that first color, so we went all the way around in this green color to create our 4 sides. Round 2, to create the mitered look, we're only working 2 sides. Round 3, only working 2 sides. Round 4, 2 sides, and so on. And that creates that mitered look. starting from this little mini granny here. In version 2, we would be working one more round all the way around. This version, we just work one round all the way around, and the next rows we're going to just be working those two sides. I've got my next color. I'm going to start with a slip knot on my hook, and now grab your square, and just because you ended here does not mean that that's where you have to start. You can start in any corner, so any of those chain 2 spaces. So I'm going to start right here, just so I don't have all these tails in my way. And I'm going to slip stitch to join that color. So we're working now on the sides. Normally, a corner consists of 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet, and then you would work all the way around. For this version of the mitered square, we're only going to work that granny cluster, those 3 double crochets, on one side of the corner. So we're going to completely ignore this side. So I'm going to start with a chain 3 like I normally would, and then I'm going to work 2 double crochets right back into that same space. So I've got my end here. If you typically chain 1 in between your granny clusters as you're building your granny square, chain 1. I'm not going to chain anything. It's just a personal preference. Everybody does granny squares a little bit differently. So I'm going to work 3 double crochets right into that next space. I'm going to be working a corner, so I've got 3 double crochet, chain 2. I'm chaining 2 for my corners, and right back into that same space I'm going to work 3 double crochet. So if we're looking at it like this, I've now got one side done and half of this next side. So again, I'm not chaining anything in between my clusters, only in the corners. We're at the last corner because we're only working these 2 sides. I'm just going to finish up as I started with 3 double crochets into that space. So I just worked 3 double crochets into that space. So there is round 2. So we've got our first round just a 4-sided square. Second round or row, we're only working 2 sides. So if you want to continue in this color, you can cut your yarn if you don't want to turn. So if you don't want to start working on this back side, cut your yarn and start over here. Slip knot on your hook, slip stitch into that first chain 3 double crochet here. It'll be the same doing that as if you turn. So I'm going to show you just how to turn without changing colors. So you can also change colors and just join on either of these corners. I am just going to keep the same color for now. I'm going to chain 5 to start, and this counts just to keep our edge straight. I'm turning. So if you're working starting on this side, you would just chain 5 and you're going to work into that next space. So I'm chaining 5 and turning, finding that space in between my 2 shells, and I'm going to work 3 double crochet into them, or into that space I should say. We're at a corner, same thing. For corners, I'm 3 double crochet. I'm not sure I know what I'm doing this morning. So 3 double crochet, chain 2, and into that same space 3 double crochet, and that creates our corner. And like I said, sometimes you may not want to turn your granny. You're going to want to work sort of all your work on the right side. But again, double crochet is not super noticeable working, you know, right side, wrong side. After your corner, we have one more space, so we're going to work 3 double crochet into that space. Alright, so now we're at this side and we need to create an even edge. So I'm just going to chain one. This is the only time I'm chaining one. It's not necessarily, but it just gives you a little extra space to work with. This chain one is going to act as one of those chains that we did to start to kind of create a corner. Again, it's not necessary. It all depends on your tension. You may not need it. You're going to find the top of that chain 3, or that last double crochet that you did. So just kind of find that top, and you're going to work a double crochet into it. And that kind of gets you that end corner. So that is round 3 right here. At this point, I'm going to go ahead, cut my yarn, and we'll start a new color. I've got my new color. We're working with purple now. I'm going to start with a slip knot on my hook, pick up my square. Since we're changing colors, I can work on either side. I can work on starting on either of these 2 corners, either the beginning of this one or the beginning of this one. You're never going to be starting anything in that fourth corner from the initial round. Just pretend it doesn't exist. So I'm only going to be working a 5-row granny. So I've got 1, 2, 3. I'm working 2 more rows, and hopefully you'll kind of see what the pattern is. So when you start on these open spaces, you're always just going to want to slip stitch if you're starting a new color or changing sides, turning your work or whatever. Slip stitch into that space. If you're not changing colors, and if I were to keep working with that red yarn, you would just do the same thing without slip stitching. So you're already going to be here. If you're here, you would have turned your work. We're going to start with a chain 3. So every time you have an open space on the edge, so we did down here, we had that corner kind of, we always started with a chain 3, and you work your 2 double crochets into it. Same thing up here, and for every following row, when there's a space, you're going to chain 3 and work 2 double crochets right back into that space, and that gives you your first granny cluster. Find the next space. You're going to work 3 double crochets into it. We're not at a corner yet, so we're just working our 3 double crochets. Now we're at a corner, so we're skipping to this corner. We're going to work a corner, and that is 3 double crochet, chain 2, and 3 double crochet right into that same corner space, and that gets us around the corner. Jump to your next space and work 3 double crochet into that space. Find the next space. This is your ending. We're just working 3 double crochet right back into the space, just like what we did to start. And here is where I like to work my last double crochet into that top of that 3rd chain, just to kind of keep it even. You don't have to, whatever works best for you. And there is row 4. If you wanted to change colors, you'd cut your yarn and start either into this corner or this corner. Because we are starting the next row on top of a granny cluster, we're always going to chain 5 because we need to create that space and get to this next space. So regardless which of these opposite corners you start in, it's always going to be the same. Same with starting in those spaces. So when you start in a space, you just work your chain 3 and 2 double crochet into that same space. When you're starting over top of those 3 double crochets, you're going to want to chain 5 and turn. And like I said, if you don't like to turn, then you would cut your yarn and start on the opposite side, and that way everything is facing forward on the right side. So you've got your chain 5, you find that first space, and you work 3 double crochet. Find your next space, work 3 double crochet. And again, if you chain anything, typically when you're working your granny squares, if you chain anything in between these, granny shells, you can do that. The granny square is very forgiving, and everybody tends to do it just a little bit different, which is why I love it, because it makes it so unique and so fun and versatile. And I mean, who doesn't love a granny square? So in the corner, I've worked my 3 double crochets. I'm going to chain 2 and work 3 double crochets right back into that same space. Skip to my next space and work 3 double crochet right back into right into that space, I should say. I'm getting ahead of myself. Find the next space. It's our last space. Work 3 double crochet, and it's not on the corner, so we don't need to chain 2 or anything. We're going to find the top of our first double crochet on the end. We're going to chain 1 just to get over there. This is again optional, you don't have to. And work a double crochet right into that corner, that edge. And that gives you 5 rounds. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my yarn because I'm done with my 5 rows or rounds, and you get something that looks like this. I'm going to take care of my tails, but I just wanted to explain sort of how you would go about continuing on this pattern. Our next row, we're starting in a space, so we're going to chain 3, work 2 double crochets into that space, and then continue the pattern, working 3 double crochets into each space. The corners get 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. You can also chain 3 or chain 1, whatever you typically do for a granny square in those corners. Find the next space, 3 double crochet, next space, 3 double crochet. On the end, because we're only working the 2 sides, you work 2 double crochet and a double crochet in the top of the 3rd chain. If you don't want to work in the top, you can just work 3 double crochets into that space. Sometimes working in the top just gives it a little bit of a straighter edge. So that is version 1 of the mitered granny square. Version 2, we're going to do something very similar, but rounds 1 and 2 we're working all 4 sides. After that we work just the 2 sides. So I'll go ahead, grab some different yarn, and I'll show you how to do version 2. For version 2, I've picked 3 new colors. I'm going to start with this blue. We're going to start in the same way. We're going to work a magic ring, or you can chain 4 and slip stitch into that first chain to create your ring. We're going to work a chain 3 and 2 double crochets right back into that ring. That's our first shell. We're going to chain 2, or whatever you typically chain for the corners. Work 3 double crochet right back into that ring. And this round is the same as version 1's round. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quick. There's our second side. I'm at a corner, chain 2, 3 double crochets right back into that same chain, or that same space. We've got 3 sides. I need 1 more side. So we're at a corner, chain 2, and work 3 more double crochet right back into that center space. I'm going to pull on my tail, and now you can see it's a square. I need to finish that corner up though, so I'm going to chain 2 and find the top of that chain 3 and just slip stitch into it. So we've got our first round square. For this version, we're working 1 more round all the way around. As with any granny square, if you like to go in different directions, you can turn your work and you'll be right there, and you work back around. For me, I like to keep it on the front when I'm doing this type of granny square. So I'm going to slip stitch into the next few stitches to get over to this next space, and slip stitch into the space. So now I'm starting at a space. If you're changing colors but still working this version, you could just cut your yarn and start in any corner. So round 2 is the same as any granny square. We're going to chain 3, and I'm going to work 2 double crochet into that corner space. Since I'm at a corner, I'm going to chain 2, and into that same corner space, work 3 double crochet. We need to jump to this corner. If you typically chain 1 in between, go ahead, chain 1. I am going to just work directly into this space. We're going to work a corner. So double crochet, 3 double crochet into that corner space, chain 2, and 3 double crochet right back into that space to create a corner. We're going to keep going and do the same thing. We're at a corner, so work a corner, 3 double crochet, chain 2, and right back into that same corner space, work 3 double crochet. We've got 3 corners done. We are at our last corner, so we're going to work a corner, 3 double crochet, chain 2, into that same space, work 3 more double crochet, and now we need to join the round. If you typically have been chaining 1, chain 1 and slip stitch to the top of that initial double crochet or chain 3. I have not been chaining anything, so I'm just going to go directly into that top chain and join with a slip stitch. So that is rounds 1 and 2. If you are keeping the same color, you're going to slip stitch over 2 stitches and into that corner space. So you want to be starting in a corner space. I am going to cut my yarn and bring in a new color. I've got my new color, yellow. Start with a slip knot and start in any of those 4 corners. I'm going to start in this one. You just want to join with a slip stitch. This follows the exact same pattern as version 1. The only difference is working those first 2 rounds all the way around. We are now just working this top side and this side. We're ignoring these 2 sides over here. Because we're starting in a space, we need to create a shell in that space. I'm going to chain 3. I'm going to work 2 double crochet into that space. And that creates our shell. Skip to the next space. If you chain 1, chain 1. I am just going to work directly into that space, and I'm going to work 3 double crochet. Find the next space. That happens to be our corner, so work a corner. Three double crochet, chain 2, or whatever you have been doing for corners, and 3 double crochet into that same space, corner space. So I've got one side done. You just have to work this side. Find that next space and work your 3 double crochets into it. Next space is a corner, and this is where we're ending. So I'm going to work 3 double crochets into this corner. And like I said in version 1, if you want to work in one of those chains for your last double crochet, if you feel like that evens things up a little bit better, then that works. Granny squares are meant to be improved on, and I mean, I don't know how you can make a granny square any better, but people do all the time. So now we've got our 2 sides done. Round 1, round 2, round 3. For round 4, if you're changing colors, cut your yarn, start in either this corner or this corner. I'm going to keep yellow, and again, if you don't want to be turning and working on the back side, cut your yarn, stick with the same color, and just join on this side, and you'll have everything facing forward. Because we are working over top of shells, same thing that we did in version 1, we want to chain 5. So anytime you are working over those shells to start, you chain 5. I'm going to turn, but you don't have to turn if you started in the opposite corner. You just always want to make sure that you're working over those same 2 sides that you're increasing on, so that you are not working on those sides that you didn't work on initially for this mitered square. Sometimes it's hard to tell which side am I working on, which 2 sides am I working on. Always make sure that you're working on those same 2 sides as you increase and make your square larger. You never want to be working on those 2 sides here. So I've chained 5, I'm going to find that first space, and we're going to work a double crochet into it. And that kind of gives us our space over top of those double crochets. We have 1 double crochet. I'm going to work 2 more double crochet into that same space. Find your next space and work 3 double crochet into it. Find your next space and work a corner, because we're at the corner now. So 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet. And I had my door open and my window open, and wouldn't you know, the neighbor's lawn people came and I had to shut the door. It's very loud. So I don't get to listen to the birds this morning. Next space, 3 double crochet, and I'm struggling with this yellow yarn. Find the next space, 3 double crochet. That's your last space of this row. So as you get over this space, you're going to want to chain 1 and work a double crochet into the top of that last double crochet of your shell. And there we go. If you are keeping the same color, don't do anything unless you want to keep working on that same side. I'm going to go ahead and cut this yellow and get that out of the way. I'm going to turn my work back around. Since I'm changing colors, I can start on the right side now. Bring in my darker blue, slip stitch on your hook, pick up your square. We're going to want to start in this top corner. If you're down here, you're going to want to have your work flipped after you chain, or after you join, I should say. Alright, so we're going to join with a slip stitch. Chain 3. We are working in a space, so in spaces we always start with the chain 3 and 2 double crochet into that same space, and that creates our shell over our space. Jump to the next and same pattern, 3 double crochet. Jump to the next, 3 double crochet. Jump to the next, work a corner because we're at a corner. So 3 double crochet, chain 2 or whatever you chain for the corner, and right back into that same space, 3 double crochet. We're now working on our side, our last side. Same thing, find the next space, 3 double crochet into it. Next space, 3 double crochet into that space. And here we are at our chain 5 space. I'm going to work 2 double crochet. You can also work 3 if you're just working right into the space. I'm going to work 2 and then into that third chain from the bottom. That's where I'm going to work my last double crochet, just to kind of keep it even. And that is a 5 round granny. I'm going to cut my yarn. If you wanted to continue this pattern, you would do the same thing every time you start over a shell. You start with a chain 5 and work right into the next space with your 3 double crochets. Anytime you start over a space, you chain 3 and work 2 double crochets into that space, and then continue with the pattern for those 2 sides. So these work up really quickly. I'm going to go ahead, weave in my ends, and we will look at both versions once I've taken care of these fun ends. So there are my 2 versions of the mitered granny square. We have the first version, which is just 1 round, and then we start working the 2 sides all the way up. Version 2, we work 2 rounds in the round, and then we start working just 2 sides. So very similar. You get kind of a different look though for both. This one I feel is more of a true mitered square, just using that one center granny round and then truly creating the mitered look from then on. This one looks a little bit more like a granny square that is just played with color a little differently than working all the way around. I like both equally. I'm using both methods and versions in my 2024 stash busting crochet and book blanket that I'm making this year. If you haven't checked that out, I'm basically just creating granny squares for each book that I read throughout the year, and I'm going to put them all together at the end into a nice reading blanket for next year. I hope this tutorial was helpful and gives you a little bit of an idea of how you can play around with granny squares and really making them your own and creating something very unique. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Until next time, happy crocheting. Bye.